to you all for coming through on this rainy Saturday morning. I imagine it wasn't easy coming through. Just to start us off, you played a clip from Hidden Figures.
Yes.
Why? What resonated for you with that snippet?
I suppose when I watched it, I was actually surprised that these figures were really hidden. I actually didn't know about these three women and their stories and the pivotal role that they played in such a huge, exploration adventure, and it just resonated in the sense about the invisibility of women's contributions, and I don't like to homogenize the concept of women itself, specifically in terms of women in general, but about women of color in particular. I think that was that struck me, that through all of my readings and travels and whatever, these were truly hidden figures, so I didn't know about them. So that was the one thing, and then just the whole dehumanization of it, where a simple thing like using the bathroom, that no facilities existed, and then the open reprimand in the midst of the colleagues, the skepticism that this woman could actually do the computation, and when Kevin Costner in the movie calls her in to ask, like, where are you a spy? So once again, I suppose it resonated with a lot of the research that I've done, where women have talked about having to constantly prove themselves, and when they excel, there's all the skepticism and incredulity about who they are and their capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And was there anything from your personal experience that kind of reflected a similar experience? Or?
Without going into all the gory details, yes, I suppose that's what resonated. It's like it's never good enough. You've always got to do a whole lot more, and then you look around and say, but hey, other people are making it through. They're getting the promotions. They're getting, I talked about my work at my postgraduate work at the University of Michigan. So with my postgraduate work, with a book published, and all of that, I was still at a junior lecturer level, earning a pittance of a salary that my parents would have, I flighted as well, was supporting me financially, despite having paid for my education throughout. And here I am, graduated with a title to my name, and financially I'm still not making it. So yes, it did resonate, and it was like, it hurts and it upsets as well. Yeah.
I think for me, since we are in conversation, I think for me, what made me quite emotive about that clip is, as a young or emerging scholar, I'm not sure what's the politically correct term for that, but you enter academia with the assumption, a very sensible one, that, well, I'm at the early stages of my career, so I'm meant to be working extra hard, I'm meant to be pushing in the hours, I'm meant to be earning my stripes. But then you get to a point where it's like, actually no, this is going way and beyond. This is getting to a point of dehumanizing me. And I know someone mentioned after the clip about the structures that we are faced with, where even if it's not blatantly like interpersonal, but the way in which the institute operates actually makes you feel that dehumanization. So yeah, that's how it actually resonated with me. Before we go into feminist awakenings and social justice and whatnot, you mentioned in your paper that there are different forms or strands of feminisms. Which one do you ascribe to? Which one orientates your being the most? What principles rather?
I think more in terms of principles rather than a label. I'm very cautious about labels and their restrictiveness. But I think anything for me, having reflecting on my own experiences, a feminism that is inclusive. That when I arrive wherever I am, that I'm not going to become territorial, so I think that would be for me the democracy of sharing information, and so therefore networks and making resources available, it's about that. It's about not also pitting men against women. It's never going to be about that for me personally, because I've certainly my own experiences. I have a very supportive husband, supportive father, and stuff. So and then so not to create this bifurcation, this dualism. And to know that we need to work together as human beings in order to accomplish the things that we need to. and I know that's not the experience of everybody, but certainly in terms of that. So it's about sharing for me, it's about caring, it's about being an openness, it's about creating spaces, and it's about knowing that there's enough place in the sun for everybody. You know? Yeah. And of course, just being critical. Just being critical and questioning everything, not being naive and taking things for granted. And then to be critical of society, broader structures, but also one of the tenets of feminist research is about critical reflexivity. Can I turn the speculum on myself, and can I see where it is that I am deficient and I am becoming an organ for discrimination as well.
I'm so glad that you've already taken it to that, because Amina Mama, who's a Nigerian, now US-based feminist scholar, she laments at how feminist theory has kind of lost the praxis a bit. And in her initial stabilization of the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town, there was this drive to try and link women's social movements with feminist scholars, so that the scholarly work, the feminist scholarly work, is actually informed by issues from the ground root, and then vice versa, so that the scholarly outputs actually helps guide the ground root activism. Do you feel that do you feel that we're losing a bit that, or do you envision ways in which we can go back to a bit more of that? How can we keep those relations going?
Yeah, I think whether we like it or not, you know, especially in terms of how women practice their being in the world, we have somehow already done that, but it's not regarded. It's not, you know what I said, the value is not quite placed on it. You know, just the very instinct of survival. You know, we talked about the nutritional issues as well in the presentation. Keeping a home together, you know, looking after the sick and the wounded and the traumatized, while still also trying to keep your chin up and go. You know, those are just practical realities. And I think that perhaps part of what academia does is to glorify and mystify things that are really our everyday reality. You know, we live through these things, and it's just that if we don't have big words and unpronounceable labels for them, then we regard it as unscholarly. You know what I'm saying? So I think it exists. I think what needs to happen is that more, respect and accord needs to be given to it, and as women we shouldn't undermine the efforts that we make already as well. Okay, so you know, academic, as I said, it's a game as well, right? You know that by now. Okay, I hope. Yeah, and you know, so a lot of critical pedagogy and critical feminist stuff has been critiqued for the very turgid, very dense language in which it is written. And I mean, I'm not even going to be an apologist. I hope you didn't find my stuff too dense and too turgid as well. Okay, but just to say that, I mean, I don't want to even talk about the psyche of what goes on behind that, except to say that to come back to the point that I made is that if you really had to, like, you know, par it all down, it's basically coming back to our work, our lives, our sex, our labor, our whatever it is, and these are everyday things, everyday concepts. One of the theorists that I've enjoyed working through is Paulo Freire, who talks about praxis. It's about not just the theoretical abstraction, but how does that manifest into practical reality. Okay, and I think for my own work, having, as I said, you know, the project that I'm currently working on, women leading in disadvantaged education context, you cannot possibly walk away from that research and keep it theoretical and abstract. The stories are too traumatic, the need too great, you know, and so I've actually tried to find ways in which we partner with organizations that would be able to intervene, to help to meet the needs of what we see on the ground. So perhaps 2 examples very quickly. So with the work that I did with refugee children, we found that they go to this program. It's a 3 to 6 program, which means literally it starts at 3 o'clock and ends at 6 o'clock. So during the day they have nothing to do, and they really look forward to getting to school. I've never seen kids so excited to want to be at school, you know. And we identified some really high-flying students. and was able to find a private school that was prepared to, you know, put them through the test, the admission test, and see that they did qualify, and to make sure that they get enrolled, and they now have it's a residential campus so that they can do their studies and they can stay and, you know, at least have that taken care of. I mean, it's a band-aid. It doesn't quite address all the children's needs, but, you know, but you can choose 5 from that and at least see them go through. That for me was heartening to be able to do that. And then we had a refugee teacher who's qualified and has all of his credentials, but because of the circumstances under which he fled, you know, war-torn country, when he arrived in South Africa, didn't have any of his documentation to prove his credentials. He tried to register at several universities, and none of them want to accept you without your paperwork. So what he had to do, after 3 years of trying to get, you know, papers, he decided that he would actually go back and start from scratch to do a degree that he's already qualified to do, you know, and is a maths teacher. And so we partner with another school where it's an extremely affluent school in Johannesburg. They were able to actually pay for this teacher to go and study, and he will graduate this year. You know, so these are little, you know, small stories along the way, but I'd rather just see hope in the little things without, you know, although we haven't been able to dent the big system.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So to talk about the multiplicity of feminisms, you know, personally, I don't have a problem with that, because I think that it speaks to the individuality of different causes and stuff like that. And I think it was Spivak, if I'm not mistaken, who talked about the potency of strategic alliance. You know, that I don't marry myself to any particular stuff, but if there's a cause, we can mobilize together and fight for that particular cause and move on. So these alliances are very fluid. Okay, and so I would think that if we, you know, I think it would be, I can't conceive of anything being so homogeneous, because that almost fights against the very reality of who we are as individuals and as people, right? So I'm okay and personally comfortable with the multiplicities of whether it dilutes the potency of the movement. I'm not quite sure whether our identity needs to be coagulated like that. You know, it's rather about the gains that we make, because different women are fighting different oppressions, right? Is that, yeah, you want to say something?
Oh yes, no, that's fine. I was just checking out the time, because I know I've moved a bit over the time, but I feel as if we get into the crux of things.
5 minutes more for the conversation, but if we're opening it up, that's fine. We can still take
Oh, okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the second question, who should be, I think everybody should be speaking for themselves. You know, the power of speech is for everybody, so we don't want to vest it in any particular person or organization or movement. I suppose the challenge is about about educating people, about encouraging people to understand that the power of their own voice, and voice is not necessarily the spoken word. Sometimes we can speak with our body and our mind and through our art and whatever it is, you know. So
if I could also just chip in, I've made note of you to answer your questions. I agree with you, Juliet. I think it's important for us to have the multiple strands of feminism, so that we have different ways of talking or engaging with our lived realities. And so I'm going to go back a bit in terms of the research that I did, well funded by Canon Collins. So I was at the African Gender Institute at UCT for my honors, looking at, for my thesis, I asked the question, what does it mean to be an African sex worker feminist? And this had actually come out from the work that I'd done when I was still working at SWET, the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force. So we had a little small group of sex worker feminists. I mean, at the time we were just a group of women, transgender women, anyone who was really concerned about issues around gender-based violence, violence against women, because we wanted to engage more with those kind of campaigns, the V-Day, 1 Billion Rising. So we were basically that kind of group. So what tended to happen is that we would find ourselves in a lot of feminist spaces, right? But always, when we were sitting around those feminist tables, we were seen as the ones that needed to be rescued. and not necessarily as fellow feminists. So at some point, I can't remember the exact incident, but I remember us driving back to the office in the Kumbi in silence because I think one of our colleagues who's a transgender woman had been discriminated against in that feminist space, which is supposed to be empowering, right? And we were like, no man, this is not working for us, because we were trying to form solidarities with our fellow mainstream feminists, but this was actually not working for us. So we decided to take a step back some time to reevaluate for ourselves then what it means to be African, to be sex workers, and to be feminists, because we're strongly identified as such. And so that's where this study came out. So it was pretty much feminist participatory action research. We'd meet every second week, funding permitting, and we'll engage with feminist material, and we'll try to figure out for ourselves, in relation to what's out there, all those strands, how do we make sense of it in relation to our lived experiences. And what actually came out of that study is that most of the participants were like, you know what, Ntokozo, now that we're actually dealing with the theories and whatnot, I realized that I've always been a feminist. It's just that I didn't have the language for it. And also, quite interestingly enough, is that many of the participants were like, you know what, actually being a sex worker enables me to claim my feminism. And it also, being a feminist also kind of helps me do my sex work in a feministly kind of way. So even though these identities tended to be seen as incongruent, in certain embodiments they actually inform each other. The same goes for the African identity. Some actually drew from their cultural practices to affirm why they feel as if doing sex work is actually not so un-African as everyone makes it out to be. So I'm actually trying to answer your first and your second question at the same time. I think it's important, again, going back to the point we'd made earlier, to try and always theorize from the bottom up, instead of working from certain set definitions of feminism, but we rather start our conceptualization, because I was interested in conceptualizing a strand of feminism that actually speaks more honestly to sex workers' lived experiences, specifically sex worker feminists who are based in Africa. So it's important for us to always start working from people's lived experiences, so that it doesn't become an elitist conversation, like you were pointing out as a concern earlier on.
I hope yeah.
I was like,
Go ahead.
actually, no, it was one of the, well, it relates to one of the questions that I was also going to ask. Perhaps pegging on that, then, in your work you make reference to the transformative intellectual. So in trying to answer that question, could you also speak a bit in terms of what would be the role then of the transformative intellectual in social movements such as Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, which are all about decolonizing the academia?
We only have
2 minutes, okay. So
Yeah,
we'll have to do a quick answer.
I mean, so certainly we have a role to play. I forget the first part of your question, Brian, I'm sorry, but I know that you're asking about the Fees Must Fall and all of it. He asked a question about decolonizing feminism. Yeah, and I think, listen, and that is exactly, I hope it came through in my presentation, that we're not going to go after the holy cows of whose voice is important and stuff like that, and that first of all, just recognizing who we are and knowing that we have a story to tell and our realities are important is going to contribute towards that debate. Otherwise, once again, we're going to be depending upon these grand theorists to tell us about stuff that we know better. We live this walk, you know what I'm saying? So of course the decolonization must start from us. And I think when I was dressing up this morning, I was thinking, Jillian, we have recently secured a series publication on education in Africa, perspectives of education in Africa, and I was wondering whether we could open it up to the Canon Collins scholars for them to be able to publish in those series, so that we become contributors and producers of knowledge as opposed to consumers of knowledge that we will, stand to critique. So yeah, then we can, as long as we don't become elitist in this as well, you know what I'm saying? So we have to self-guard against that. I don't know if that helps, Brian.
Yeah, I think it does. I think what is much more important is to have grounded research.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yes, and I mean what Ntokozo was saying with regard to the participatory action, the critical participatory action research is really important, so that it's organic and it's grassroots rather than some pie in the sky ivory tower stuff. Comes back to say I try to avoid labels myself, so don't bother. I mean, if you can live it and you walk it, that's enough. I think, you know. Yeah.
I think for me it's I mean, I own my feminist identity, and I think for the group that I was working with, because of the political agenda that we were on at that point, where we wanted to form alliances and get some sort of solidarity from your mainstream feminists, it was important for us to reveal for ourselves what that identity and label means. So I would say it depends on who you're engaging with. And it sounds as if in your context and the people that you're working with, it's not that important. And like you said, they are already living this. So if you're able to engage with them on that basis, then the label is not necessary. But with the group that I was working with, it was important for us to really unpack what that label and term meant for our lived experiences, for us to be able to engage with those mainstream feminists. So yeah, it depends on who you're working with.
Call it anything you want to, as long as you respect the human dignity of people. I think that's important.